All right, good morning and welcome back to another watercolor class. Today we're going to be doing this cute little succulent here, and I just want to go over the basic shapes so you can sketch those in. So here we have this front petal, so it's kind of a spade shape. As you can see, like we can come in and add some little spiky edges to it later. This other leaf is going to come right up from the side here, up behind it, and come back around into here. Then this one, let's bring that down a little further. Okay. And then this one's going to come off the side and come down, and maybe swing that down a little bit more. Then this one here is going to hoop up this way, come up, and then if you notice here, we've got a little bit of return on that leaf where we can see. We've got a little bit there and a little bit there. That helps to bring a little more dimension into it. And then we're going to have our petal coming off this way, so about from here up, and then it's going to come down kind of toward the center. And then this front one is going to come up this way, and then again we've got that little edge here with the return. And then the pot, we've kept that pretty basic today. So we're going to get that base layer in, and then we'll kind of start developing, some contour to that. So we're going to start off here with let me grab something to wet my colors. You can dribble your water on. Sometimes this is just good to kind of hit all the colors quickly. So I'm going to start off with, I'm going to bring some of my sap green over. We're going to be using some of that. Keep a little more. So what I'm just doing here, where I keep going back in, is I'm just trying to bring a little more intensity to that color, so I have the option with how strong I want to use it. Okay. And then for our blue-green color, we're going to be using some of the Viridian green, which is right next to it. I need a little more water, I guess, here. Bring some of that. So when you're doing with your watercolors, I see sometimes in classes where people want to paint too much from the pan, and it's really about bringing the color over so you can control that intensity of it. So if you bring a nice little inky little blob over, so now if I come in with a clean brush, a little bit of water, I can then control that to that consistency that I want when I'm first laying down that first layer. So we're going to start off with this front one here. Okay. And so like when I put down the color and I kind of see how much is coming out, notice when I blotted off my brush a little bit just to so I can lighten this up. This is going to be my lightest colors in here. And I just want to keep moving that around. Just keep it nice and light. And so now that that petal is wet, if I have a couple little spots that I want to, just bring a little bit more in, I can put that in, and it's going to be nice and soft. So see if I want to bring a little more intensity here with that green, but I'm going to keep maybe these sides a little lighter, where they're a little more highlighted. just going to keep feeding a little bit in there, not too much, because we'll come back over this. So see, I've got a lighter edge here, and I've got a little lighter bit here where I can kind of bring that contour. Right. So now I'm going to actually work on this one here next. And so to deal with these two areas being wet, I'm going to leave the tiniest little gap in between here. And then later when I'm doing my little shadow areas, I can fill that in. It also allows, like I've got a little white edge here, which kind of helps to highlight that edge where the petal's coming around. So you can kind of use that to your advantage or fill it in later. So on this one, it looks like I've got a little green up here on the top, but it switches over to some of the blue green that we'll get when we combine those other two colors. So I'm going to keep pulling that. And now I'm going to pick up a little bit of this. Just want to have enough that I can kind of pull around, and I don't want them to bleed together too much there. Okay. Same thing, come right up in there next to that without having them bleed together. If if this is a little more wet, that's going to be a little harder to get to do that, but I do want to keep that differentiation between them. Okay, and let's see here, let's build a little more in here. Just get a nice gradation there between those colors. So you've got that kind of pretty variation there between those. So, it doesn't have to look exact. Your own kind of interpretation of this will still probably look very nice. Okay, so I'm going to work on this one here next. Now, I think what I'm going to do here on this little part to kind of fill that edge out, I think I'm going to make this part a little darker, like maybe where that's kind of down. I don't really have it on that one, but I think that this would be a good place to kind of bring a little shape, or maybe that's curled in a little bit. I think that's maybe the underside of it. Okay, so I'm going to start out here, and that gives that a little bit of time to dry. switch our color a little bit now in here. Hey, buddy. Okay. And then these areas down in here, when we come back over, we will be able to, you know, bring that definition by bringing those dark areas in. Let's bring a little more. There you go. And then we'll come and work on this one next. So I've got more of the blue here, blue-green. Green. So just a damp brush now, and I'm just pulling that down. So here, like when I'm coming in with my damp brush, and I've blotted it off where it's a little drier, but yeah, I can actually lift a little bit of color if I feel it's getting a little too dark. Okay, and then we'll come up and do this one here. A little more on the green side. Okay, more just water now. I'm just gonna keep pulling that out. And then I'm gonna switch here to a little blue. Do where we've got that green, we're going to come in just with very light, the blue green on this side, which is going to give that return edge on our work out here towards the tip, so that gives me time to let those edges in there dry a little more. And so here's where that little bit of that white edge, if I just leave a tiny bit of that, that is definitely too wet right there. So I think best bet is just, so if I blot that out now and just put that color that I need there, I'll just leave that blank and I can come in and do that later. Okay, soft blend. And I'll come back and do that little edge there. All right. So I can go ahead at this point and just do a light layer in for my dirt. And I can use a little bit of the burnt sienna for that. Maybe just a tiny bit of the burnt umber. Here I need to allow for that return on that. And so, when you have to line along something like that, pull those strokes out so you're not leaving that brush stroke edge. And that's all I need to worry about right now. The pot, I'm not doing a whole lot of detail to that. It's really more about the plant. So I'm going to come back now again where I started, and I'll work a little bit more. So here's where I'll come back into that green and give it a little more intensity to it. And then again, I still want to leave those areas light, so kind of start building up that contour. And down in here I can start to drop in a little bit of this color. So just put in a little. I'm going to wipe that out of my brush. My brush is just damp right now, and then I just want to work this into what I've got so it's nice and soft. So if you're doing something like this, when you've got a little more detail, realize that you're going to have to come back and work on it in, different layers. So you've got, so you continue to build that intensity rather than trying to go like too dark too quick. All right, so look, I'm going to bring a little bit in here, so behind that, and then I'm going to rinse out, blot out my brush until it's just damp right now. And so my goal is where I've placed that line, I want to disturb it and make it much softer and pull that color out like that. And I'm going to do the same thing in here. Pull that out. A little more of that green. Now when I was doing this one, once I kind of got my colors in, there was a step that I came in and I did lift out a little bit of color to kind of strengthen my lighter tones. So right here, I'm actually kind of lifting more color out. Okay, so that's layer 2 on those. So down in here, bring that more intense. And pull that out. You know, I can remember as a kid watching Bob Ross. I'm talking like under 5, because I remember the house that we lived in. And I remember even then, like, how mesmerized I could be watching him paint. So, you know, that just, I don't know, I guess maybe I've always had that kind of fascination even at an early age. Alright, so here we're going to come into our little deeper areas again. Mm-hmm. Soften it out. I can pull some of that up. Looks like I need a little more green on here. In here, dryer brush, I'm going to lift out just a little bit right in there. And we'll come into this one. So here, when I'm putting this darker area right into this part and kind of pulling it up, I want to kind of imagine that cupped shape. And so here's where it's going to be like a little darker in here. So I've lost a little bit of that return edge. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come in and see if I can lift out a little bit of this in here. It's not seeming to do too much for me. Let me grab a little magic eraser here so that paper is damp. Let's see if I can pull out. I have a whole tutorial on the magic eraser. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry. I needed to get rid of that hard line that was there because I just didn't have enough space to kind of do that return edge. So see, mistakes happen. You know, it's another thing, like when you start off doing like a light color on something, if you do make a mistake, you know, it's not like you can't come back from it. You know, so a lighter mistake is going to be easier to fix than a darker mistake. So here's where I needed to lower that down and kind of define where that bottom edge of this petal is. So now I've got, that's a much better shape there. And then here, let's a little darker in there. I lost my blue though, didn't I? Bring a little in here and soften all this out. Okay. There. And we'll be able to define that a little bit more in there as we work on it next time. Okay, so put a little color in, and now I'm just going to keep pulling. Again, I'm going to leave that little edge right there for that thickness of that petal. I know in our area right now we have some fires going on. Some areas have had to be evacuated. We have had a very dry winter, and the ground's really dry right now. Okay. So if I come in here, I'm going to bring a tiny bit more of this, a little bit darker, right up in here. I'll do this edge here a little more in the green. Try not to keep shadowing what my hand is doing. Alright, so I'm going to come and work on these one more time before I start bringing any of the accents in. So I'm just going to do a little bit more of the same, what I did on my second layer. So I'm going to start back in here. And just those areas I want to kind of intensify. Make sure I've got that my colors are nice and smooth. Okay, and then here, let's bring a little lift. And down in here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to need a little more of these colors here. So yes, the dogs are hanging with me right now. Okay, so put that in, don't panic, because we're going to come in with a damp brush and soften that out. A lot of this just gets to where like you're doing a lot of kind of push and pull with your colors. Okay, I'm going to come in now to the one back here. And get rid of that brush stroke, and then just let it come up and fade up into. So see, now we've got some nice contrast there that brings that one that's in front up. Let's see how I can do this without turning my paper. So, rinse out my brush, blot it, and start to pull that up. And then, here where that edge is, smooth that out. And just let it feather out. I think that's probably enough for that right now. And then remember, I've got that, did that little return edge here. So I'm going to come in and Continue to deepen up down in there. Rinse out my brush. Soften the edge. Hair. So again, come down in here. Rinse. Now the good thing about when you're doing a class like this on, you know, following a video is it gives you a chance to, like, you can back things up, you can stop it and or re-watch it. Okay. All right. So again, remember we're down in here. We're gonna keep that a little darker so we got a little contrast there on that edge. And then when you're starting out, sometimes, you know, you're not sure of what supplies do you need. And that's probably one of the great things about watercolor is you don't need like a ton of supplies. You know, I like to kind of work from a core set. I have a couple sets that are bigger that maybe have, you know, 24 to 30 kind of colors in them. But there's not really a whole lot that I can't do with that, I can do with that I can't do with a core set like this. So when you know, if you look, you've got like your 2 yellows, you've got your 2 reds, 2 blues, 2 greens, you've got 3 earthing colors. I can mix black, but I did pop a little bit in the well there. And then, like I said, magenta for me is a core color because I like doing florals, and you know, could you have more pink choices for your florals if you were going to add in extra, you know, extra colors and stuff? Sure, but I think when you're first starting out, learning to kind of start with the basics, and then you can kind of expand from there. The white I use that Dr. P.H. Martin, that bleed proof white. And I'm trying to think, I used a little bit on here, just a couple little highlights, and I'll show you too what I do with that. You can actually mix a little bit of your color into it, and kind of tint it. So if you're trying to do like the stamen on a flower or something like that, it is possible to kind of get an opaque color with that if you're trying to cover up what's underneath it. you know, like maybe you didn't reserve the whites for that, or you know, like you don't have any gouache, or maybe, you know, like I really don't care to use masking fluid. I would rather kind of fix things with an opaque white, or you know, do it that way. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to do now at this point, as far as like I'm not going to go back over everything. I'm just going to see here, where do my shadow areas need to be, you know, my darks need to be deepened up a little bit. So, you know, I definitely need some in here, and I need some in here. And I can go, you know, where my deepest areas are. So I'm just tapping a little bit of that in. And my brush a little drier there. Pull that around, pull that up. Okay, so let me, okay. So before I get into adding the orange color, so here's where good time I can fix maybe a couple spots that have some problem issues. So I'm going to just use a little bit of my bleed proof white. What's good about this is that you can thin it down. Like, so if you want it more opaque, you use it, you know, thicker and creamier. If you want to thin it down because you're just kind of highlighting in here, you can diffuse it out. See what that little bit of lightness does right there, just bringing up that edge. I'm just going to soften that. Here we'll do a little bit, like I don't want to completely cover up what's going on underneath, so when I kind of thin that down, and then when that pot is here against this, it won't get lost. Right now it's against that white, so I don't have any contrast, but when I do the pot, so in here, like I said, we can kind of, so rather than doing like a distinctive outline on this, and if I just kind of come in and touch some little spots, sometimes that's all that you need. Okay, and then I think in here, I'll probably bring some more like orange against this and kind of really set off that edge there. Let's bring a little bit right in here. I think in here So this is, like I said, just kind of my area to come in, evaluate, see what needs a little bit of attention. So I might need to let this dry here and still come back. I think I need a little bit more down in here. That's kind of my focal point area, where that depth of that. And that's the thing, like with your watercolors, where they do dry a little lighter. Sometimes you can kind of put a color in and you think you've got all this contrast, and then it lightens up a little more than what you thought it would. So it just means, you know, give it a little time to dry, and that's going to allow you to see if you need to come back and touch it up again. Okay. Something down in there. I'll give that a little time to dry. So here's where I'll start adding a little bit to those edges. So for that, I'm using some of my cadmium red and some of my burnt sienna here. I'm just not getting any on my brush. So now I'm just trying to get, I don't want a super wet brush when I come in with this. So I can kind of blot out and then pick up just a little bit there. So we kind of start in here, and I'll do more than one layer to this so I can kind of so if you notice, I'm trying to put this on a little bit irregular, so just it looks more natural rather than having a distinctive line. And let's kind of break it up here a little bit, going that way. And then we can come on down this way. Okay, skip a little bit. And add a little bit in there. Come up here. Yeah, other little things when you're drawing things in, you know, if bring different little curves and shapes like that into your drawing, it's going to help to make it look a little more natural and a little less stiff. I know that was, that took years for me to kind of learn how to overcome that. see when we bring that up now, it kind of brings a little clarity to what's going on. And I'm going to do that same thing in here. And that kind of helps to differentiate between those. And then on this edge here, I'm going to tap just a little bit. And down around this way. So remember, it's not about doing a straight line, it's more about just some delicate tappings and highlights. So I think here I'm going to bring just a little bit in here. And I think I'm going to come back and deepen up down in that little area a little bit more. Soften that. And that's the thing that's always going to be, you know, every time you paint this, or you paint it, or somebody else paints it, no two paintings are going to be the same. And, you know, you have to kind of get to that point where you can kind of stand back and look at what your piece looks like and try to, you know, say, okay, what does it need? What seems out of balance? And you just have to kind of keep tweaking it and adding. All right, so I'm going to give that a minute before I come back over and do a second layer on the orange tips. I'm going to kind of use that same color. It's just going to be a lighter version of it for my pot. I should probably mix up a little bit more. There we go. That little terracotta color. Okay, so I always try to start off on where my thing is the darkest. So here I'm going to start off on this side. My little friend here, Cody, short for Kodiak. Okay. And then I can go ahead under here. Pull that over. So on something like this, yeah, you see I left some white space in here. I don't mind if it stays a little more textured. from. Ready for my magic eraser. And so by coming down here, I've given this edge here a little time to dry, so I can come in now. So that is too wet for me to get any distinction there. So I'll have to let that dry a little bit. One thing I could do is come in here and pick up a little white, and I could come just right over top of that and maybe lighten that up a little bit. Let me let that dry. I'm going to come and just tap a little texture into my my little dirt area. And I see here I need a little bit of color right in there now that I've got all those, kind of seeing how everything works together. So I'll just stain that just a little bit. I think that would look best if I actually go a little darker, because that's kind of deep down on this part. Okay. Let me just smooth that out. See, that kind of distinguishes between there. This is the edge, this is that part underneath. So, you know, we can kind of pick around at this as much as we want to, and that's where, you know, sometimes I try to get to that stopping point that I say I'm okay. A lot of times it depends on, you know, how much time I have that day as far as how much further I want to develop something. I do want to get a chance to show you how you can kind of strengthen up a couple of these areas with a little bit of the opaque white, just using it to bring just that little bit of opacity to your color. Because like here you can see where that's very transparent. Let me grab just a little bit more. Just kind of thin that down, and then here where I can kind of come in, and I'm just going to kind of smudge that into kind of what I've got. I don't need to cover it all up. Good thing about this too, I find like if I go too far and I lighten something up too much, I can come back and add color over top of it. You know, I wouldn't use it for like if fixing a mistake per se, like you're gonna cover it over and then come back and repaint it. I don't know that it's gonna work quite that way for you. Okay, and then while I've got that, if there's any little areas like maybe I want to highlight, make sure I've got all that orange out of my brush. Like if I want to strengthen up a little highlight in a couple areas, I can just use that very thin. Here. This got a little too bright up in here, I can come back over with a little bit more. Just kind of break that up a little bit. And then I'm going to throw a little shadow in under here. For this, I'm just going to use some of my green with some of my brown. Just kind of get me a gray there. Okay, and I'm just going to throw a little back this way. So hopefully, if you have any questions, I do need to come back and define that edge there. If you have any questions, I've always loved to hear from everyone. You know, tell me if there's anything that your questions as far as what I'm doing, as far as products or how to get that effect, or something you'd like to see me paint. You know, I just think that key when you're starting off, you know, start off with projects that you can have success with, and you know, then kind of build from there. This one has a lot more detail than what I've done in some of the other ones, but you know, kind of break it down in little steps so you don't get too overwhelmed. Now I do need to, I had lines here from my colored pencil when I was sketching that in that I didn't use. So let me just get rid of those. And there you have it. So I'd love to hear from you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and we will see you for the next class.